Good morning and welcome to our webinar this morning, everybody. Today we're going to be covering defending your business, practical steps against common scams. My name is Cliff Turner. I'm an entrepreneurial ecosystem strategist here at ATB, and I'm going to be your host for today. I'm based in Edmonton. We're just getting the tail end of a little snowstorm here, so I'm curious to see where everybody else is in the province. So if you can, jump into the chat. Feel free to put in where you're tuning in from, how much snow you got, and if you'd like to share what your business is, whether it's established or an idea that you have, feel free to share that in the chat as well. Before we get started, I'd like to kind of kick us off with a land acknowledgement. All of us here are in Treaty 6, 7, or 8 territories. And here in Edmonton, it's Treaty 6 at one point, because I feel reconciliation is one of these things that it's a journey as a society, but it's also a very personal journey for each of us along that path. And a real turning point for me on that journey was probably about a year and a half ago. It was an experience provided by ATB for its staff, actually. It was called a blanket exercise. And I just like to let people know about it and encourage you to look into them, because for me, it was a real turning point in my understanding of what reconciliation is all about and my part in it. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, kind of going to school in the 80s. And so and I was in a rural area. So you can imagine that the narrative I was given was very far from accurate, very glossed over in the school system and just in the community in general. Very, very inaccurate depiction of our history. And so from an Indigenous point of view. So you actually get to physically walk through the history with a facilitator that kind of helps you see what actually happened during the years that the European settlers came here and everything that was the fallout of that, and brings us right up to today. So I'd really encourage you to check out a blanket exercise. They're available everywhere. Just Google blanket exercise in your area. I'm sure you'll be able to find someone who facilitates them and take part. For me, it was a real turning point, like I said, and I'd encourage you to experience it yourself as well. With that, it's my pleasure to announce our speaker for today. We have with us Deryck Greer. He is an executive technology, cybersecurity, and operations leader of Protexa. He was a former secret and top secret cleared senior cybersecurity and intelligence leader with over 18 years of professional practice across multiple domains, financial investigations, fraud, and law enforcement. He has a wealth of hands-on applied professional and operational practice and provides thought leadership to executives, governments, politically exposed, and high net worth individuals with a specific focus on security posture, risk mitigation, operational security, breach readiness, containment, and future threats. In today's webinar, Deryck will share how you can equip your employees with knowledge and tools to recognize and stop scams, implement robust identity management practices, and stay vigilant against threats. He'll also show you how to foster a security-first mindset when it comes to your organization. He'll cover topics such as phishing and vishing attacks, deep fakes, managing identities and access to your systems, employee training, and incident response preparedness. So there's going to be a real deep dive today. It's going to be great. Before we get started, though, I'd just like to give you a note. There is a chat feature there. Throw them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them either during the presentation or at the very end, but throw them into the chat whenever they come to your mind. After today's presentation, you'll receive an email within a couple of days with some follow-up material and a recording of this presentation as well. So with that, Deryck, I'll hand it over to you. I'm looking forward to this information.
Thank you very much, Cliff. Welcome, everybody. There's a lot to go through, but we'll do it in stages, and please feel free to ask questions along the way. Post those in the comments and we can address them right as we get going. I see some of you are already posting the businesses or the sectors that you're in, and that'll be really useful to answer any contextual questions. So let's start with why we're here. So we're going to talk about some of the common scams, 3 of them in particular. So focus on identities and business email compromise. Another is around the phishing scams, like Cliff said, and around malware and ransomware. I'll give you some stories and examples of things that have happened in real life in each one of those examples as well. And then I'll talk about some of the frameworks within cybersecurity and information security that you can use and get access to help you mature your own security within your business. And then there'll be some practical steps. I'm not going to go into too much of a technical deep dive, so that way it's a broad approach for everybody on the call, and then some key takeaways right at the end. So one of the things I want you to think about is try to put yourself in the mind of a threat actor or a hacker. And generally we think of a hacker as someone who is sat behind the computer, they have that hoodie on, they're in the basement, they're very technical, they understand programming language, code, etc. Maybe they come from a networking background. And that was possibly true, 15 years ago. Over that time to now, the entry into the market, if you want to call it that, of hacking or threat actors has become a lot easier. And that's because the tools have become a lot easier. And with the rise of access to the dark web, people can go out and actually buy a hacker for a service, just as you'd buy any other service. So this means that, threats are increasing. But with this one, what I want to speak about first is, why do hackers love identities and credentials? And so when I was at Scotland Yard, one of the things we looked at a lot was things like burglary. And things that happen in the physical world generally represent themselves in the digital world as well. So what's the mindset of a burglar? Very similar to the mindset of a hacker. They'll try the doors, they'll try to jimmy the window, but if that's locked, if it's closed, if there's a camera there, generally they'll move on to the next house. And what they're looking for is that easy score, the door that's left open, the window that's open, can I get in easily? And so for that reason, your identity is very important to a threat actor or to a hacker. So what do I mean by identity? So generally within your business, you're either using your personal email account to manage your business, if maybe you're a solopreneur or a sole trader, or if you're a small business that has 5 or anywhere to 50 people, you're using a corporate email address, your name, first name, last name at yourbusiness.com or .ca. And that user identity or that user name is very important because of what gets access to all the systems that you use, from your accounting to Salesforce, maybe to manage your customer pipeline, to some of your security tools, to your emails, to your application and your platform if you're building software, and to your customers. And why is that? Because hackers, like everyone else in that space in terms of crime, is going to look for the easy option. And if I can get your username and your password, that's like a perfect scenario. And when we think about identities and passwords, there was a survey done in 2021 here in Canada. And still to this day in 2021, more than 50% of the passwords that were identified was password, or it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that tells you that people aren't really taking their passwords seriously. But why is that? Because it's difficult, right? Managing all these passwords, remembering all these passwords. How do I write, where do I write them down? What do I do with them, etc. And we'll talk about some of the solutions around that. But why do they like to get your username and password? Because it allows them to have this thing called business email compromise. But before I do that, if you can set up video 1, we'll have a quick look at that. And the reason I like to play this video is that it gives a visual representation of what a hacker kind of thinks about. So over to you if we can play video 1. Brilliant, thank you. So as we're saying, that mindset of the hacker is, can I break down that door? Can I get into your system? And they will try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 times, and they're going to move on to something that's easier. So that's why it's important to have good identities. What I want to show you next on the next screen is an example of something in the dark web. So on the internet, there's the clear web, which we're on right now, your Google, your Edge browser, your Chrome browser, your Firefox, etc. Then there's the dark web and the deep web. On the dark web, this is where criminals generally sell criminal things because they think it's safer there. They use something called Tor, which is the onion network, because it provides a level of encryption and obfuscation, so that way they think they can't be identified. And in this image, you will see that this is an advertisement for data for sale. And two things I've circled here. One is the price. This is $160. Generally, these prices are in US dollars. And then it says what's for sale. Well, password, username, address, full name, telephone number, zip code, all these things are available for them to buy. And there may be hundreds or thousands of different credentials in there. How do these individuals get these credentials, one may ask? Well, applications are being breached all the time. I don't think there's any service at the moment that we use where they don't ask you to either create a username, generally as your email address, and then ask you some questions about your identity, mother's maiden name, these sorts of things, etc. And then that goes into a database for that company. If that company gets hacked, that data goes out of the organization and now it goes into the dark web. And how do threat actors use that? Well, they'll get that username, they'll get that password, and then they'll say, okay, maybe you're a financial startup, maybe you're selling art, maybe you're a mechanic shop, maybe you're posting on Facebook, on social media that your business is doing quite well. And based on the password, they might guess, well, you'll probably use a variation of that and then try that on your business accounts to get in and to get access. And why do I say that's important? And here's why. A few years back, Facebook had a breach. And in that Facebook breach, there was, as you see, millions of people's data that was shared. And with that data, it gives what? What do we post on Facebook? We post things about our friends, our family, our pets, significant moments in our lives, holidays that we've taken. And how do we create passwords? Well, generally, we create passwords based on the things that we know, things that are close to us, things that are personal to us, things that are easily remembered. And some people will say, well, create a password, say for your Facebook account, Deryck FB 2024. And some people will say, well, that's a strong password. Then the new recommendation would say, maybe put some characters in there. So they might say, Deryck, you change the E to a 3, you put at FB, change the 0 to an O, and that's a really strong password. Well, yes, to a certain degree, but if your password has been leaked and they see that you use that format for Facebook, then the presumption is you're probably going to use that same format for Twitter, for LinkedIn, for your banking with ATB, for your QuickBooks, if you're managing that, and for other things as well. And so that's why it's important to make sure that you think about how you manage not only the identities, but your passwords as well. So if we think about identities, let's say you have a business with 5 people in it or 50 people in it, or it's just you alone. I'm going to start with the individual. One of the things you want to think about is this concept of least privilege. Because if they get access to your identity and they get access to your system, then potentially they can do anything they want in your system. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's think about this here. So you'll see on screen the concept of least privilege. And while you read through that, I'll explain to you sort of the sole individual, the small business, and then the bigger and maybe 50-person organization. So as that individual, most people use Windows. About 80-85% of the systems in operation for businesses is on a Windows device, probably about between 80 to 85%. The rest is a mixture of Mac and sort of Google. Most people will have some sort of Dell, Windows, Lenovo, or some other laptop. They'll get it set up and they'll start right away. So talking about that sole individual, whether it's their business email or their personal email, they do everything on that one profile on that device. That profile on that device is generally an administrative profile, which means that once you log into that profile, once you have the username and password, you can do anything you want. You can download applications, you can get into the email, you can get into all the other applications on that device. There's many things you can do. So the first recommendation would be, even on your personal device, you should set up 2 profiles. One is your administrator profile, and this is for that person who's just that one individual running their business. And the second is your work profile. And there are videos out there on YouTube that shows you how to do that for the different type of operating system, whether it's Windows, Mac, etc. And it means that now you log into the administrative one, when you want to do something major with your device, download new software, update your security tools that you're using, and then you use the regular user for your day-to-day activities. Let's take that to a business that maybe has 5 to 10 people. So you have your Microsoft environment. Let's say it's Business 365 Premium that you're using, or using Google Cloud or MacBook. You're going to have an administrator. And that administrator is going to be the one that's going to be issuing new credentials to someone. So let's say someone starts in your business, a new financial officer in your business, or someone from marketing, or an engineer, or a salesperson. You're going to give them a username and password. Well, that administrator is able to create identities and give permissions to individuals. And that administrative account should only be used for that purpose. It shouldn't be used for day-to-day business. So if you're the CEO of that business, so you're the chief operating officer, or it's your sole business, and your account, so let's say Deryck@yourcompany.com, is the account that's the administrative account, the first thing you should do after this is look at changing that. Your personal account, your day-to-day using account, should not be the administrative account. It should be separate. And that account should only be used for managing those identities or making changes or giving people privileges. And the reason for that is that even you as an individual, you only want to have access to the resources that you need at the time that you need them to do the job that you're doing. Because if your administrative account gets compromised, then again, they have that golden key and they're into your system. That's one of the things you can do right away. Now, what if you're a bigger organization? Maybe you have 2 or 3 different administrators. You have 50 people in your company, maybe 2 or 3 different locations that they're working from. You might have a team that manages your identities. In that scenario, you want to be monitoring regularly those administrative accounts for things like this. Are they creating new admin accounts? Because ideally they shouldn't be. If you're a size of 50, generally that team would be very, very small. Is the administrative account escalating privileges for someone else without going through some sort of change process? So if you have 50 people in your organization and you need to give access maybe to the marketing team or sales to something specific, a database or files, etc., and that requires new privileges, there should be a process of approval for that. And then it goes over to the administrator to make those changes for you. And so in those 3 scenarios, the single person, the smaller business, and the larger business, you want to make sure you manage those administrative accounts from the user accounts. Think of giving people only access to the rooms that they need. The example I like to use is a hotel. You get your key card, ideally you go in the elevator, you need to touch that key card on that little pad on the elevator, and it gives you access only to your floor. And then when you get to your floor, you only have access to your room. That's an example of least privilege in real life, in practice. Okay. So this one here is talking about the process of business email compromise. So this is going to talk through, have a read of the image there, and I'll give you some examples. So what is the hacker looking for? The reason I showed you those other slides about the information that's out there about you is that hacker is going to be thinking about, how do I get into that business? How does that business work and function? This is called reconnaissance. They're going to be thinking about, what's your email format? Is it first name only at your company name? Is it first name dot last name at your company name? Is it first name dot last initial with a random number? These are some of the things that they use to try to find out what's the methodology of the email that you use. Once they have that, they then want to understand to a certain degree your processes. Now, for bigger business, maybe they order something from you. Maybe they see a sample of your quotes or your invoices. That gives them a template that they can use to execute the fraud that they want to do later on. And then they start looking at, how do they attack? Who in the chain? Is it your chief of staff? Is it your EA? Is it someone in accounting? Remember, most of these attacks in regards to business email compromise and others is motivated by one thing. Generally, it's money. They want to get money out of you, either fraud and take money out of your organization, or execute ransomware, we'll talk about later on, to get money from you. So what I'm going to show you next is just some examples. Had ChatGPT knock this up. These aren't real companies. These are just random companies that have been created. And on the left, you'll see Michael Smith at acme.com and Laura Jones at companyxyz.com. I want you to take a moment and put yourself in the mind of that company. You are either Michael Smith or Laura Jones. And in your company, you send emails to your staff all the time from that email address. whether it's your operations officer, your accounting department, your third-party bookkeeper. Maybe you're using a third-party person because you're not big enough to have somebody in-house, or you're using a consulting company, or anybody else that has access to money or resource in your organization. And now I'm going to show you another slide, another image right next to it. And I want you to look through very quickly and see, do you think those people in your organization would spot the difference of an email coming from Michael Smith compared to michaelsmith.acmee.com? And it's just those simple changes that a hacker relies upon, that they can send this to your CFO, or they can send this to your EA with instructions from you that looks like you, that will cause them to go ahead and execute, a change. Pay money into this account, sell this, buy this, give this person access, create a new email or identity for this person, generally with a sense of urgency. Now, most people will say at this stage that haven't seen this before, have this happen to them, Deryck, come on, realistically, of course I'm going to see there's an extra E in the email. But how many of us actually check? When you receive an email from someone, do you actually check that there's an extra E or an extra underscore or dash? Look at some of the examples there and see whether you could spot that very quickly, looking at the list. And what I want you to ask yourself is, are the people in your business, in your team, have you talked to them about this? Do they even think about this? Are you the type of employer where generally, there isn't a process? What you say, they go ahead and execute? Because if there isn't, that's how people attack it. They're attacking the process that they presume. They get an email from this authority, they're going to go ahead and execute what's been asked of them. So we'll pivot to two examples here. Cliff, is there a question here you wanted to ask at all?
Yeah. First of all, I'm blown away by the proactive nature of everything you're presenting here. I think it's really important that everybody be on guard, especially with this slide, showing how subtle those traps can be. So I was just kind of wondering, a question came up. If you do believe that you've actually been compromised by one of these subtle traps, what are the steps to take at that point?
Okay, great. So let me flip to one of the examples, and then I'll answer that. So while you're reading this example, I'll answer that question. Generally, the first thing you want to do is change the password. Hopefully you've implemented multi-factor authentication as one of those controls to put in place. It doesn't solve all the problems. It's not a magic bullet, but it is a really good blocker that you should have turned on. And what is multi-factor authentication? That's that frustrating thing that pops up that says, send me a text message and enter in the code. That's a really, really useful mechanism for, getting rid of some of these threat actors trying to get into you. The next is look at all the other emails and email accounts in your business and in your profile. If you're that single individual, the solopreneur, I'll call it, go into your email, and whether it's Google or Outlook or Mac, they have a feature where you can look at connections and see, where have I connected from? Did you log in from a new device, or did it show you log in from a new device or a new location? And if you don't have that security setting on or that security feature on, after this, log back into your account and definitely turn that on and say, notify me of new logins from a new device or a new location. Yes, you're going to get more emails coming through, but you definitely want to see whether that's happening or not. And then the third is provide some training to your team as well. And depending on if somebody has compromised your system, then get some help to, recover from that. So thanks for that question, Cliff. So here's an example of Google and Facebook. So these are two of the biggest companies in the world, and this is an example of the business email compromise they suffered. The key takeaways here are thinking about the number of vendors that this company has, probably hundreds, if not thousands, when you think about their global footprint, not just buying technology, but premises, rent, electricity, all the different things that they're using. What happened here is this threat actor created a fake company, right, to look like a real one that they were doing business with, and then interrupted their process to have them pay this individual for services. And what amazes me about this one is the mindset of a hacker. If you look at the amount, there was $121 million that this person was able to get out of Google and Facebook by diverting payments from a legitimate supplier to themselves instead. And I always wonder with criminals, and I've never really found the answer, how much is enough? Why wouldn't you stop at 12 million or maybe 20 million and, close it all down and disappear into a beach somewhere in Bali? But they kept going. And the other thing that's interesting with this type of fraud is financial fraud. And this is why you need to think about the motivation, is that compared to offenses against the person. So violent crime, these types of offenses, this person only got 5 years. $121 million in 5 years. So the reason why I stress that is to tell you that the motivation for a threat actor is still very high, because financial crime is not punished as severely, for very good reason, as crimes against the person, an assault, physical assault on an individual. But perhaps maybe we should think about increasing these sentences as a deterrent, because if you think about that as an investment, serves 5 years in prison, maybe he's hidden some of that money away in cryptocurrency and comes back to that and it's there. That's a lot of money that's gone. The other example I'm going to give you here is Toyota. And the reason I use this example and why I recommend reading this one is because this didn't happen once to Toyota. This person got away with $37 million, smaller amount, but this was the third time in that same 12-month period that this had happened to Toyota. So what does that tell you? What are they attacking? They're attacking the process because they have enough information to understand this is how these businesses work. Things are generally paid with an automated way. Once I can get into the system, just like with money laundering, once you get the money in, then it goes through that automatic process and it will be paid automatically. So what should you be thinking for your business? So let's start with that sole individual. With that individual, make sure you understand who your critical vendors are. So anybody that's paying money out of your organization or anybody that's paying money into your organization, you want to make sure you have very robust processes with them. I would also recommend setting some threshold for transactions based on your own risk appetite. If it's over a certain amount, maybe it needs to come to you for approval, or maybe you go into the bank or meet with that person to process that transaction. For the smaller to medium-sized organizations, there's some really great software out there. Because I'm going to be software agnostic, you can go and look at those yourself. But most of the financial processing software tools have things in it to put checks in place and gaps to double check once you put limits. So it goes to the accounts receivable or payable, then it needs to go to you to authorize or to someone else. Make sure you have those processes in place. A lot of the times in business as entrepreneurs, we like to be that single point of control. But if you're the one responsible for all those things, once you get compromised, there's no second layer of defense, no third layer of defense, or no fourth layer of backstop. So think about putting some of those processes in. So we've spoken about business email compromise. This is the situation where either they're able to compromise your identity, get your username or password, or they're able to spoof a user identity that looks similar to yours to cause something to get done. That's sort of what I call the golden ticket. Now, if they can't get that, what do they do instead? Generally, you're going to look at something like a phishing attack. So phishing attacks, not high complexity in terms of to be able to execute from a threat actor's point of view, but very, very efficient. And why is that? It's because an organization can put in all the defenses it wants. You could put in an endpoint detection and response tool. You can put in antivirus, anti-malware. You can put in ransomware protection. You can put in lots of things. But if the user, the people working in that organization, see an email that's engineered to make them want to click on that, either with a sense of urgency or with something that they think is important or valuable to them, they're probably going to click on that email. And once they do that, if you don't have those other tools in place, that's then going to execute things onto your devices, or it's going to put you in a chain of processes to get you to do something. So we'll talk about each one of these in turn. The first one I'm going to turn to is probably a very popular one, a deceptive one. So this is phishing by deception. Many of you might have heard about this bank. This was SVB. A few years ago, this bank went belly up. And what was important about this at the time is that it didn't go belly up because of threat actors. There were other things around it in terms of investments. But this bank was a financier for startups, which is very important because startups, as we know, in that first year to 5 years, there's a lot of cash flow management that's taking place. You have a lot of outgoing. You're trying to, increase sales and revenue. You're bringing on people, managing your workflow and your resources very, very tightly. Threat actors saw this and thought, okay, here's a great opportunity, because what do threat actors look for? Urgency. If there's a sense of urgency, for example, during COVID, a lot of fraud, a lot of phishing scams came out during that time. If there's a business going down or collapsing, if there's a tragic global event, a lot of scams get set up around phishing at that point in time. Money. If they see an opportunity to get money or to exfiltrate money, then that's going to be a high opportunity that they're going to say, let's capitalize on this. So high stakes. And then the third is there confusion and chaos in this scenario? And if there is, then information is much harder to come by that's true. It's harder for the people receiving this attack to delineate, okay, this is factual, this is not, because they're also making decisions in a very fast-paced in terms of duration of time. So before I go to some of the examples that were used in this attack, some of the examples of what the threat actors used, I want you to think about yourself in this situation right now, that you're banking with maybe two banks, so you're with ATB, and then maybe you're with another bank that you got some investment funding, your seed capital or Series A that you raised, and you have some money in there. And the story about that bank comes out that it's closing down. You try to log into your account and it says, we're unable to log you in at the moment, we're going through some difficulties, and it says, don't worry, your money is safe. Don't panic. And then you get something like this. So you get a DocuSign maybe 2 days later. So 2 days have gone by, you can't access your money, you're worried about supplies, maybe you want to move the money from that bank into ATB where you know it's safe, and you get this here. Have a look at that. What's interesting about this is this was one that the threat actors used for DocuSign impersonation. And it basically said, we need to revalidate our KYC. So the know your customer. We need you to go through this process, and then we'll be able to get you access. What would happen is, when you clicked on the link, it would then take you through a series of different stages, eventually to ask you to log into your account, whether it's another bank or to your Microsoft account, and then they have your username and credentials. And then they can then log into your actual Outlook or Gmail or iCloud or whichever, or Mac or whichever service you're using, and now they have command and control in your environment. And the question you have to ask yourself is, would you have clicked on that link? Now, in this scenario, while we're having this conversation, probably all of us are going to say no. But put yourself in that moment. If you could think back to when SVB was going up, the panic that you saw in some of those business owners' face and voice when they were talking on the news about worrying about being able to pay vendors, worrying about suppliers, worrying about making payroll. Maybe you might have done that. And if you didn't do this one, well, maybe you might have fallen for this. So this is one that they used again to SVB. Because people were worried about getting their money out, they sent out this email saying to click here, and SVB is going to pay you back your money in Bitcoin. And this was a reward program. Now, it looks like a legitimate page. Maybe also included in this might be a follow-up that we're only going to pay X number of thousands of customers first. They'd fabricate to create that sense of urgency. And then you click on that, it asks you to scan a code. And if you have a Bitcoin wallet yourself, they'll then look to compromise assets from there, or then a follow-up asks you to pay, to receive. And that's how they get money out of you. And what you need to remember is that often this type of attack is en masse. They're not targeting maybe you specifically, they're going by the thousands or hundreds of thousands. And if 10% or 20% of those individuals reply and they get a hit, that's financially viable for them. So how do you deal with this? So one of the things you want to think about is training people within your organization about links. If you put your cursor over the link itself, you'll see the actual link pop up below, generally in the email, and you'll see whether that's accurate or not. There are also some other tools like antivirus tools that are free online that you can take that link and stick it in, and it'll tell you whether that's susceptible or not. I'll pause here just in case there are any questions in the chat or any questions anybody wants to ask.
Yeah, Deryck, I really love how you're pointing out how the bad actors in this are not only coming at us from a technological point, but an emotional point too, looking for those people that are stressed or panicked. That's incredibly important to recognize, because we do think very differently in those situations. But yeah, one question that's come up here is, what are the impacts of a phishing attack on a business?
Great question. So I've heard some people say, okay, well, what's the big deal? I clicked the link, maybe it's not ransomware or malware. They try to get me to do something else and fill in my information. I don't do it, no big deal. Well, that might work for you, but what if somebody in your organization does do that and they're able to compromise your organization? The biggest impact, besides any financial loss or business disruption, if someone was successful to get into your environment, is reputational damage. And there are two aspects to this reputational damage. First is the external. So what do your customers think about that? What does your banker or your lender think about that? in terms of the impact to your business? What do the other vendors that do business with you think about that? Maybe, whoever manages your bookkeeping or any other service they provide to you, they're going to be thinking about, if this happens to them, is this going to fail over to me? Because these things generally scale in that way. And the other one often that we don't think about is the internal impact on the business. So what are your employees going to think about that? Because you have their name, date of birth, their address. You probably have somewhere in your database their next of kin or emergency contact. You probably have somewhere in your accounting or HR their SIN number, their CV, and they're going to be thinking, well, is my information safe with this company? And that can create more things because people start to think, well, I'm not going to take things here so seriously because this business might be going out of business soon, and that opens up more risk to your organization. Yeah.
That's some great tips. We actually had another question come up in the chat that might fit in well here. Sure. Tim is asking, how important is it to consider the security layers across all of your business's technology stack? So he gives the examples, domain hosting to
Yes. So
website hosting.
This is one of the things that I'll cover when we talk about.
How do you manage that?
Okay, I think you cut out that last part. I'll repeat. The question was about how do you manage the different layers across your security stack in terms of from your domain, let's say your website, to your servers, if you're hosting things in the cloud, to your email. Is that the gist of the question?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is you can't do it all. Cybersecurity is always going to be a trade-off between what you can afford to do right now versus the risk that you've identified and the reality or the assessment of that risk actually maturing. So what would happen if is what I call a risk maturing. All of these are prioritization exercises that you need to do as the business. And so for that reason, the first thing I would say when you think about the different stacks is try to identify all of your assets. A lot of businesses don't know what all their assets are. So let's think about the assets. So there's the technology assets, your laptops, desktops, mobile phones, things, etc. There's your infrastructure assets, the actual servers. So let's say you have a store, whether it's a retail store or some sort of services store. And at that store, there's the computer underneath the till or the checkout or the point of sale. And that actually has all your customer data on it. Well, that's your infrastructure, right? If that's all that you have. What if there's a flood? What if the splinters go off and that gets wet and that gets lost? Well, that's all the data gone. So you need to think about identifying your physical, digital, and infrastructure assets. The other thing you need to think about is your informational assets. Things like your list of customers, your databases, personal information, where are those housed and where are those stored? And then ask yourself from a priority standpoint, which of these are most critical? Now, some things are going to drive other things up the chain of criticality. For example, if you're processing personal information, so things like people's age, gender, religion, any protected characteristic, you have an obligation under privacy laws to protect that information. So that's definitely going to move that up the priority chain. If you have infrastructure that's maybe hosted by a third party, it's hosted on AWS Cloud or Azure or Google or Oracle, or perhaps some of that is being managed by a third party for you because you're using platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. So the underlying elements, that's going to be managed to a third party. So that exercise, you need to go through that in a very robust way. When we come to talk about some of the practical steps, I'll give you some examples of tools and things you can use at the different layers to speak specifically to that. And I'll also reference some of the frameworks, which are free for you to access and download, that helps guide you through that thought exercise that will answer that question for you individually. Any follow-ups on that, Cliff?
Awesome. No, that's great, Deryck. Thanks for the in-depth answer.
Okay, I'll keep going. Next one. Okay, so we spoke about the deceptive. This is the general email that that goes out phishing to everyone. But what about spear phishing? So what is spear phishing? Two examples here. One from the city of Ottawa and one from Barbara Cochran. She was on Dragon's Den. Have a read of both. But the key thing here about spear phishing that's different to general phishing attacks that's sent to everybody is this is targeted specifically at a person or to achieve a specific purpose. And that outcome is generally to get some sort of payment from them. In both of these scenarios, the key thing here is understanding from the threat actor's perspective, what they want to understand is what's that authority relationship? who has the authority to execute something that everyone else will follow. So in the first scenario here, in the city of Ottawa, I believe it was the treasurer got an email from their boss, from the city manager, saying that they needed to go ahead and pay this vendor. And there's always a sense of urgency to these things. Now, perhaps that had happened before. The other thing with this is they had an invoice that looked very similar to the invoice template that they used. So this seemed like a repeatable process. And because that came from their supervisor, from the person above them in the change of authority, it wasn't challenged because there wasn't a process in place to necessarily challenge that. The second one, let's think about this individual. So Barbara Cochran, very highly visible. Think about yourself. How much do you post on social media and Facebook about your personal life? I'm on holiday in Greece. I'm away in Spain. I'm going up to the mountains. I just bought a place here. This particular attack was, because she's involved in property, was them spoofing her personal assistant to send this to their bookkeeper to say, send this money because we're buying this property and we need to close urgently. Now, does that happen in real life? Probably. Would this have happened with this individual before? Probably. Maybe they might have even posted about it, had to close a deal quickly, was able to turn it around. Thank you so much to ABC. Threat actor in their reconnaissance looks at these and sees opportunities here. And so some of the things to think about is authority. So if you're in a position of authority, what I want you to do right now is ask yourself, have I empowered the people in the layer beneath me to challenge me? So if a scenario this was to come and they said, transfer $100,000 right now, do they feel comfortable that, hey, is that really you, or to call you, or to email you, or to double check? And if you don't have that, maybe you want to foster or create an environment like that to avoid these scenarios from happening. The other thing I would say, as before, think about the thresholds within your organization. Make sure those are defined and communicated, especially when it comes to money going out. Invoices over a certain amount needs to go through a second line of approval. You want to always double check that if the payment details change, that should be a mandatory stop. So for example, what do I mean by that? If you constantly pay a vendor to a certain bank account, let's say Scotiabank, from ATB to Scotiabank, or you receive money from a particular customer, and all of a sudden that changes, that should raise a flag that somebody goes and investigates that and validates that to make sure that it's correct. And then the question to ask yourself is, would you have recognized this as a scam if you were an employee working in that? If you have an EA or personal assistant, would they have recognized that as a scam, or would they have executed it just like those individuals? Fortunately, in the latter scenario, they were able to intercept that and freeze the money before it got moved on to another account. All right, so we go on to vishing. Vishing is basically voice. So someone calling you up on your mobile phone. Generally, it's to your mobile phone these days. It used to be to landlines, but who has landlines anymore, right? This is probably one of the banes of my life because it happens so often. It happens so often that sometimes we don't even realize that it is a phishing attack. Think about how many times you've been called. Would you like to take part in a survey? Do you have a furnace? Do you want heating and ducting? All these are precursors, legitimate calls, they could be, but also what threat actors use as precursors to start the process of taking you down a series of actions. Now, what's the bank impersonation? Generally, they're going to call from a phone number. And if you see a phone number that says ATB Bank on it, that's calling, always be suspicious. With who I banked with when I was in Europe, generally I'd save the number for that personal branch, but sometimes they call from a call center. I never automatically assume that because it says name of that bank, that it is the bank calling. And generally the scam goes like this. There's a sense of urgency. Ma'am, sir, we've identified something wrong with your account, a transaction of an enormous amount to get you panicked. We need to verify this to make sure that if this is fraud, we can stop it. They're trying to help you to help yourself from a fraud being executed against you. And then they'll say, we need you to log in. We're going to send you a link. Click on this link and double check. And ideally what that link is going to take you to is to a login page that looks very similar to the genuine login page of that bank. And once you enter in those credentials and those details, they then have the login credentials to your bank. This is another reason why a lot of banks have implemented this multi-factor authentication where they send you a text message, etc. So it's good to keep that on. There's actually a movie out at the moment called Beekeeper with Jason Statham, which is all about this attack as the precursor that sets off the movie in action. And actually, that first 20 minutes or 15 minutes of that movie is how these things operate. There are call centers around the world where all they do is this all day. They get the phone numbers and they try to get you to carry out an action. The other one is tech support. Another one, you get a call from a number saying we've identified, they'll say it might be your ISP, your internet service provider. We see some activity on your Wi-Fi or device. We think your laptop has been compromised. Can you confirm your email with us? They're going to ask you to do these things, and then they send you the email thinking you're going to access it from that device and then execute the attack. The Social Security, Medicare, unsolicited investments, those are pretty straightforward. The telemarketing, same. They're all going to call you and trying to offer you something urgent. The one that's really prevalent around this time of year is the government one. And why? Tax season. You're going to get a call saying there's a massive refund. Or how many of you received that text message saying, hey, CRA has processed your refund. Click here to confirm that it's you. And generally, they're going to get you on the phone, ask you to confirm some banking details or to confirm where you want the payment to because the details you sent them was incorrect. And that's how they try to get the details from you. With all of these scams, here's my recommendation. No matter who it is that calls, putting aside the investment and some of the other ones, ask them for, do you have a case number? Because if they're calling you and saying there's an issue with your device or your phone or your Wi-Fi, generally with most service companies, there's going to be a unique case reference number that's generated. So ask them if they have that. If they don't have that, ask them, okay, where are you calling from? Are you calling from whichever physical location? Ask them to identify that. And also ask them, do they have a phone number you can call them back on? And the reason you ask for that is because what you're going to do is you're going to then go on to either your incident response plan or to the information you have about your bank or that service and call that number instead. And then say, I've received this call from your support saying I have this issue. Here's the reference number they gave me. Here's the phone number they called from. Can you verify that this is an issue or not? And that's one simple way that you can start that process. Generally with banking as well, if you take out your bank card and look on the back of it, there is that help and customer support number that you can use for personal banking. And for all of you on this call, you would have your business banking relationship person. So, hang up the phone and call them because they'll be able to check whether something genuine has been raised or not. Now, the example here was one where this is in British Columbia, and basically the victim received this call. They were using PayPal actively to do things and said, hey, you owe PayPal about $500. And they panicked. They called the number and they said, no, it's actually $50,000 that you owe. And the victim starts to panic even more and actually goes ahead and processes part of this payment. In all fairness, this was somebody who was maybe older in age in this time and very susceptible to this type of scam. And it does happen all the time. Again, I would say if PayPal, anybody like that calls you, or oftentimes your loved one or someone in your circle will call you and ask you, tell them, nope, hang up the call, go and search for the genuine PayPal number and call that customer support directly. Okay. So that's phishing, right? But now we're in a state with phishing where these static kind of interactions and some of the voice calls where it sounded like someone else have changed and evolved. And we're now in the world of deep fakes. And so what is a deep fake? So about 15 years ago when I was intelligence, we were working on this, on how do we identify deep fakes? How does this work? Is the technology available back then that you could create these things? And it wasn't, and it was very, very difficult to do. But with the technology today that's available, they're now in a place where they can create not only deepfakes of your audio, so it can sound like you, but also of video. And so this first image here talks about some research that was done in these different countries about could you spot a fake or a real video. What's surprising to me on this was that Mexico was up around 80%, and that globally, 50% of people think they can spot a deep fake. I can tell you, working in this industry, just looking at a deep fake for a 30-second or interacting with a deep fake for 30 seconds, it's very, very difficult to spot, extremely difficult. And that's when you know you're looking at it. When you don't know, or when it's your day-to-day activity, you're driving in the car and you get a phone call, or you're busy doing something else and you're slightly distracted, it's even harder, that threshold, to identify a deep fake. And so This one here talks about, again, some of the things of what period people are worried about. I will call out here from this list, these kind of 3 or 4 are the big ones you should be worried about. Why is that? We're in a world now where we've had this concept of fake news, but fake news have existed for hundreds of years. There's been fake news around, right? What's happening now is the ability to push out information directly to the person it's intended for is a lot faster and easier, and it can also be customized to you specifically. So worrying about somebody putting a deepfake of yourself out there, things like what I'm doing right now, where my face, my voice is out there in the public, the threat actors are able to take that sample of my voice, and then they can recreate it, and now they're able to sound like me. They're able to take the sample of my face and then put it onto a frame that it looks like me in a deep fake. And this is something that banking and other industries are worried about in terms of identity theft, not only people using deep fakes to create accounts, but also using deep fakes to access accounts. And so I'll pause here and I'll ask you if you can play video 2. This video is going to show you an example of a news agency in the United States showing how easy it was to create a deep fake in a very, very short period of time. So video 2, please.
Cybersecurity expert Pete Nicoletti created my voice from old news reports online. What you're about to hear is something I never said.
Hey, this is Carter. I need your credit card number right now.
I mean, that really sounded like me.
It is you. It's cloned you. It's AI Carter.
To test it out, we called my mother.
Hey, I'm about to do an interview, but I have a quick question. I need you to text me your driver's license number as soon as you can.
She fell for the fake voice.
I feel bad. I feel terrible
We
about
just
it.
scammed my mom. Did you just get a call from me?
Asking for my driver's license number?
Yes. That was an AI-generated voice.
Oh, God, Carter, that's scary. Is this the real you now?
This is the real me now.
We live in a post-real society. You can't trust the voice, you can't trust the photo, and you can't trust the video anymore.
A voice is like a fingerprint, and that's that unique fingerprint that's being exploited and weaponized. It has to.
Brilliant. So in that video, what you saw was how quickly it was to create. Now, the tools to do this aren't illegal. There are actually some tools out there called voice.ai. If you search, Google search or ChatGPT search any of these tools, it'll show you it. There are YouTube videos that in 10 to 15 minutes, you could get up and running. People are using these for, TikTok things, different types of social media, but threat actors are using this to create these deep fakes. And the next video that you're going to see in a moment is going to talk about how this happened in action. And I'll explain a high level of what happened before the video goes on. This was a company in Hong Kong. The threat actor was basically not only able to impersonate the voice, but impersonate a video call with multiple people on the video who were also deep fakes to convince this individual to execute this transaction. Go ahead and play the video. Great. So what I want you to think about is the level of complexity here. How many of us would have executed this transaction? So you're working in a financial industry where you're doing big transactions and big trades or big deals. you were suspicious, you asked to jump on a video call, you get on the video call, and you see what looks like 3 or 4 people in the video that are confirming to you, yes, go ahead and execute this transaction. But again, this business didn't have a process in place for immediate urgent transactions. And so this person went ahead and did that, and they were scammed. Okay, next we're going to move to ransomware and malware. And I'll go a bit quicker here because I'm not going to go into too much technical depth on this one. But some of the things for us to think about is, why is ransomware increasing? So what we see more and more is that the world is becoming more connected. There are 8 billion of us, and nearly 5.5 billion of us have devices connected in some way or the other. You can see on that second image there how many of that are kind of smartphone devices versus desktops. You'll see that change. It used to be desktops and laptops were a lot higher. We're moving now to more mobile devices and also to more wearable devices. And over the next 10 years, I think even mobile devices and wearables will become more integrated. And with things like Neuralink and augmented glasses and reality, we're going to see more wearables. But are these technologies secure? Organizations are building these applications very, very quickly to push them out to market. And are they putting the security in place to keep those secure? So one of the reasons is definitely there's more technology. But why does ransomware happen? Well, each one of those applications that they're building or they're pushing out, there's often defects in the code in terms of how things should work. And threat actors look for that. There's a very popular kind of framework called the OWASP Top 10. It's the Open Web Application Security posture. And it has the top 10 that threat actors use to compromise applications. Now, generally adware, that's where you click on it, you go on a website. Generally, it's a pornographic website. They have loads of adware and malware on there, or something that's selling something, a discount website. And then that's on your device, and it's going to push out all this type of adware for you to click on. If you see that on your device has been compromised. If you see pop-ups and ads coming all the time, you need to look at your security settings or download some security tools to deal with that. But what's the purpose of ransomware? What is it that they're looking for? Generally, it's all about Bitcoin. They want to get you to make a payment. And how does ransomware and malware work? So malware wants to spread. It wants to propagate as quickly as possible throughout your system so it can compromise those devices. Ransomware is about encryption. It's going to encrypt your device, lock it, and then a message is going to pop up on your screen telling you are making a demand for payment. This is an example of one that we experienced when I was in Europe in terms of law enforcement. And you would be surprised how many people were susceptible to this. And the advice that we're giving individuals is that if what this was saying was true, that you have been involved in looking at video or content online that was involved in children or child images, the FBI would not issue you a $200 fine. There are going to be far more serious consequences. Probably in the earlier video with that big key, people are going to be coming through your door to put you in bracelets. But this worked. This scam definitely worked. But what happens with scams like this is we look to identify signatures. So how some of the security tools work in your device is they look at the signature of a malware, and that's things like the file type, how it works, the size of the file, hash values, and it looks at that and says, hey, look, this looks like it might be malware, block it and don't allow it. The other is behavior. It looks at the behavior of the application. Is this working the way it's supposed to? Why is, the calculator, when you open it, going and try and call a library or create a database or access a file? It shouldn't be doing that. And the last one is sort of that anomalous behavior as well, which is looking closely at algorithms and monitoring the patterns of what you do and how you use it. So these are some of the ways that the security tools help to identify ransomware and malware on your devices. But these are in relation to things that are known. What about things that are not known? And this is the 0 day. And with 0 days, it means that there is a vulnerability in your system, whether it's Microsoft, Mac, Kali Linux or Linux itself, or an application that they're able to exploit. 0 day means that it's zero. It's the 0 day before it actually has been found to be exploited. And 0 days or 0+1 days are very, very important to hackers because it means they can get into organizations without there being any protection. And here are some of the ones on the right. WannaCry in 2017. I remember when that affected the National Health Service in the UK. The impact there was, operations canceled, patient data unavailable. And it was odd waking up that morning and hearing that the health service was dealing with a virus And I thought, well, why is that? Why is that news? That's what they do every day. Until we realized, oh, actually, it's a cybersecurity virus. And 0 days are going to continue to increase because there are more applications going to market as quick as possible that people are downloading to their phone or their devices. But how do you deal with a 0 day? This is where an incident response plan comes in place. What's important with an incident response plan, you'll see the steps here, prepare all the way to lessons learned. The frameworks that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute, we'll talk through some of these, but you want to have a plan. Right now, I want you to think about if you were to see on your screen a ransomware ad pop up or a prompt saying to pay this, what would you do? Do you know who to call? How would you access your data? How would you get access back to it? Is there somebody else that has the administrative privilege to go back and roll back to a newer version? And if you don't have answers to those questions, it means you don't have a plan, and you definitely need to get one. So what can help you with planning? Well, cybersecurity frameworks, and there are many of them out there. I'll touch quickly on the Canadian ones and then some of the international ones. So from a Canadian perspective, at the federal level, there's PIPEDA, which is the Personal Information Protection Act. It has controls in there that tells you things you have to do. There's also the Canadian, or what they call CAN-CIOS 104/2021. Those links will be shared with you on the call and in this document. And that's the baseline cybersecurity controls for small and medium businesses specifically. And it tells you a list of things you should go through and put in place. At the provincial level here in Alberta, we also have PIPA, which is specific to us. Quebec has Law 25. So if you're selling to customers in Quebec, you need to comply with that Law 25. The main thing there is that your data protection officer, you have to appoint one. By default, it's the CEO, and that person needs to be listed publicly on your website of who that is. And then there's some sector-specific things like health, et cetera, and banking as well. Okay, these are some of the international ones. The one I want to focus on is NIST. Again, SOC 2, if you're in supply chain or you're trying to sell to a bigger enterprise or to a bank or to government, they're going to look at a minimum for some sort of certification like SOC 2 certification. NIST CFS is the cybersecurity framework. And why I like NIST is that it gives you, just at a high level, some things to think about. So I'll talk to these quickly. Identify. What do you want to identify? You want to identify the assets that are important to you. Once you identify those assets, you then want to protect them. And once you protect them, you want to have some detection in place that if something happens to that asset, you're able to be alerted for that. An example I'll use is your home and a Ring doorbell. The asset is your home. The protection that you put in place is that Ring doorbell that if somebody walks up, it recognizes it and it sends you something to your phone. That message to your phone, that's the detection that you put in place. Somebody's outside my house or walking up to my front door. The response is, what are you going to do about that? Maybe you see that it's, the post person and like, okay, that's fine, no response necessary. Or you see it's somebody looking a bit dodgy or suspicious and actually going around the side of your house. Now you want to call 911 or maybe go back around to your address. And then your recovery is if something has happened, what are you going to do to get back to normal as quickly as possible? The links to this are shared at the end, and this does have a specific guide for small businesses that can help you follow to implement those things. So some of the practical steps. I'll skip this one. I'll go to this side because I know we're running short for time. The things I want you to think about when we talk about those layers is about the first thing is authentication. That's your identities. How are people accessing your system? Who are you giving access and what are you giving them access to? An important one here is implement multi-factor authentication. Everywhere it can be implemented, implement it. It's not a golden ticket. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it will move your maturity along the way. The second is don't store your passwords in your browser. One of the fundamental principles about multi-factor authentication, it's something you are, something you have, and something you know. Have your password manager on your phone, whether it's iPhone or Android. Most of them have a built-in password manager. Store your passwords there because if someone compromises your laptop, they're onto your browser and they're into most of your applications. Second is make sure you have some kind of security on your devices, both your laptop, but especially your mobile as well. There are things like CrowdStrike, Microsoft Defender natively for Business Premium, and iCloud and Google have similar things as well. The next is vulnerability scanning. There are many tools out there. You buy that service to scan your environment, see what vulnerabilities are there, and close those as quickly as possible. If you can't afford vulnerability scanning, then whatever tools you're using, make sure automatic patching and updates are turned on for your mobile phone as well. So that way, as soon as the patch is released, it's updating as soon as possible within your infrastructure. Then some of the more mature things that you're going to look at is application protection. That's something you're going to buy in. Same thing with ransomware protection, to buy in as well as a service. If you're scaling as a business and you have more than 5 people, you want to start to think about these things, because you're going to become a target for threat actors. And then the last layer is sort of that managed support. Get help. If you're not in the business of cybersecurity, then you're in the business of selling whatever product or service you're doing. You don't want to become a cybersecurity company. There are many organizations that offer managed services or fractional experts that can come in and help you manage your cybersecurity. Okay, so some key takeaways. This slide, when you get it, go back to your organization and ask the people in your organization these questions. What's our critical findings? When was the last time we provided any training or testing to the staff? And based on the answers to those questions, implement those things or get them done. And then the last is the resources. So here are some links. Again, you'll have this. The second one is the NIST Quick Start Guide. The fourth one is the Canadian version for baseline controls for small businesses. And the first link is Cyber Alberta. Now, this was launched a few months back by the government of Alberta. I've gone onto the website. It has some great links and resources on there, some PDFs and guides that can give you answers to a lot of the questions that you may have beyond this presentation. And then finally, I'll end with who we are. So Protexo, we offer training for your staff. We offer managed services to help you protect your environment. We offer training and consulting. And we also offer training to help build up your staff to become those cybersecurity people that you need within your organization. And with that, I'll stop there.
Awesome. I'm not Cliff. My name is Lindsay, everybody. Cliff was having some technical difficulties, so I'm jumping in to finish off the rest of today's event. So first and foremost, thank you so much, Deryck, for sharing this really critically important information with all of us today. Especially that awesome kind of layered approach you shared at the end. There's definitely what I consider to be some low-hanging fruit there that all of our participants can really take away and implement like today if they wanted to. So to everyone on the call, please don't forget to go back and review those tactics and those resources slides. I think that really well summarized how you can kind of take the steps forward into protecting your business. So we do have one question in the chat today, which is, Cliff wants to know, how do you feel about family tree websites where people enter quite a bit of personal information to track their ancestry? And do fraudsters ever collect this information to use against victims?
Okay, so we all have people in our life who are very visible on social media and Facebook. And I'm no different. I'm not on any of those family tree, but people, that are in my family are. And you're correct. The moment that website, I won't call out anyone in particular, but the moment that website gets compromised and all that data gets exfiltrated out, they have your mother's maiden name, your date of birth, your place with your father's maiden name, all this information that's going to be useful for them to try to compromise your account. And so while I'm not saying not to use things like that, I would say be very cautious about what information you put out there. Some people say, oh, I got my DNA result from whatever and me, and here I'm linked to this person, and then they say, oh yeah, I realized this person is in my family. You're building a picture, a reconnaissance picture for a threat actor, and you need to be aware of that. And I'm not saying become insular and shut down and escape from the world, but everything that you do, be conscious about it, be deliberate in terms of your information.
Yeah,
I see a
of
few
course.
other questions in here. Do you want me to answer those quickly?
It definitely makes you rethink what your security question is for your password. I'm not seeing any other questions in here right now, but what we can do is in the follow-up email we'll provide a link. If they have any questions for you, Deryck, they can kind of follow up in that chat email. And shoot you a message if that works.
Sure.
Yeah, with that, I think we'll wrap it up today. Thank you everybody for joining us on a snowy Thursday, or especially here in Calgary, it's very snowy. You'll see that Carrie put a link to our feedback survey in the chat. So if you could just take a moment to open that link and give us some feedback on today's event, that would be super helpful. We'd love to know what you thought of today's session. And please do remember to keep an eye out for that follow-up email from us in the next few days. We'll include link to the recording, the follow-up materials, including those great resources and key tactics slides, and of course, registration links for upcoming events, which we hope you can attend. We have
Lindsay, can I add something quickly before we close?
Yeah, sure.
So I will say I'm very passionate about cybersecurity, especially from my background, because I know the impact it has when this happens to you. You know, it's not only an invasion personally, but it's your whole life feels like it's unraveling. And if this audience found this useful and they want to do some in-person sessions, I'm more than happy to attend one in Calgary and in Edmonton, because then we can talk a bit more granular about their particular context and give some more practical on-hand advice. So that's my offer to your group.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. And yeah, I can feel the passion. We're really passionate about it too. Banking is so closely related to, fraud protection and cybersecurity. And yeah, we especially, it's Fraud Prevention Month this March, but we're passionate about that year round for sure. So thank you so much, Deryck. So yeah, we hope to see you at some of our upcoming events. We have Barter Boost up and coming in Calgary on March 26th, which is exploring entrepreneur exchange platforms. And then we have a couple other events, a virtual session on thriving under pressure, and then another in-person session in Calgary on building resilience on April 16th. But we'll send you all of those in the follow-up email. But if you want to stay up to date and get those right into your inbox, you can also subscribe to our Entrepreneur Center newsletter, which Carrie has thrown the link to that in the chat as well. And with that, thank you again, everybody, for all your great interaction in the chat today. It was great chatting with you all. And I do hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we really look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.